little segment, I'm actually going to be Ernst Walters telling you my experience leading up to and through World War II. All right. First off, I came from the Saarland, and before I bring up a picture showing you where the Saarland is there anyone here who knows where the Saarland is located, or who would like to fathom or hazard a guess?
Is it southern Germany?
Southern, and it borders Germany and another country.
Switzerland?
Austria.
No.
Poland.
No. Anyone?
France.
Yes. So, in the modern German state, this is where Saarland is located. Following the First World War, after Germany surrendered to the Allies in the Treaty of Versailles, my nation of Saarland was separated from the rest of Germany and made an independent nation. And the Saarland is simply just a very tiny location with a complete inability to sustain itself economically without being part of the larger German state, and it had never really been forced to do that, especially as in the industrialized world. Tremendous economic upheaval followed to the people of the Saarland. So, yeah, we could not cope with sovereignty. We could not cope with that economically. Especially in my own hometown, mining was the way of life for almost everyone. The mining was not a happy life. I got to know the mines even though I had wanted to become something totally different. In mining meant that beneath livestock there was such exploitation, and the miners were simply just taken advantage of, and there was very little hope for escaping. In 1935, the people of the Saarland were given the option of rejoining Germany. We were given the option to vote on whether we wanted to rejoin Germany or not, and Hitler was already in power at the time, and over 90% of the people in the Saarland voted in favor of rejoining Germany. Very few cared about Hitler's politics. It wasn't, we didn't care, fascist, left, right. Very few people in the Saarland really cared about any of that stuff. It was simply economics. Hitler and the greater German state offered economic stability, which we had been lacking for almost 15 years. So, in 1935, when Saarland rejoined Germany, my father warned me to keep my hands out of politics. He said, if Hitler comes to power and if he gets his way, there will be a war. I was already part of a paramilitary organization, but this meant that I was a Nazi target. When the Nazis were moving into the Saarland, setting up parts of their Nazi regime, there were certain groups who they were targeting, obviously Jews and communists, but as part of a paramilitary group that wasn't affiliated with the Nazis, I quickly became a target. A school friend of mine who wound up being influential within the new regime pulled some strings. He convinced me to leave the paramilitary organization to save my own skin, and later he also used influence of his own to get me to join the Nazi Party. In 1936, I was appointed a minor Nazi official, and 1 year later, in 1937, I was bumped up to be a Nazi cell leader. I was afforded considerable political kickbacks. Very few of the Nazi officers in the Saarland really cared about Nazi politics. They were mostly there because there was safety from being targeted by the Nazis. There were great benefits offered for joining the Nazi Party, and especially for being a Nazi officer like I myself became. And it was just life away from the mines. It was a chance to do something that we had never gotten to do before. I ended up becoming a soldier in 1940. I spent a small time in France, and then I ended up traveling to a city in Romania, the capital city of Romania. Here is a picture from the 1930s, shortly before I went. Anyone know what the capital city of Romania is? Yes?
Budapest?
Yep.
Budapest is Hungary.
Oh, I thought it was. Oh no, it's Budapest.
Close.
I revealed the question, and I have been close. My bad. Bucharest, not Budapest. My memory's fuzzy. Yeah, I joined the military in 1940 after France served as Hitler. At first I was infantry, and later I became an engineer in France. They mostly had me become an engineer because I was familiar with all the mining in the Saarland. Because the Saarland bordered France and Germany, I was fluent in both French and German. I was transferred to Bucharest, lucky at that, in 1942 to learn Romanian, and therefore to hopefully assist the Reich in multilingual projects. Now, whenever the Germans went, the first thing they did was pick up Jews. I noticed that in the Saarland. I noticed that when I was working in France. I definitely noticed that in Romania when I was working at transport control. I saw Jews being loaded into transport trains. As I said to Eric Johnson, I am not blind. I was worried about what I had seen. I didn't know the train's destination. They didn't give it to most of the people, even in transport control, but like many others, I suspected. In May 1942, I was transferred to the capital of the Saarland to work at the Reich Rail Service Directorate. There, I worked primarily on the schedules for hospital trains, but on occasion I was called to work on Stalag. Stalag was the word used to describe prison camps and death camps, and also the trains, and send people there. So the destination was never given whenever I was switched from my normal hospital work to the Stalag work, but once again, I usually suspected that it was one of the camps. I was at this point already aware of the camp's existence and the fate awaiting the Jews. Anyone want to take a guess as to the year that I was first aware of the Jews' fate?
43.
No, earlier.
38?
Earlier.
35.
Yes. 1935, when the Tsar first joined with Germany, I was already aware of what was going on with the Jews and what was awaiting for them.
Broke my leg.
All right, and then I passed out a paper with the anecdote on it. This is just an anecdote about a motorcycle ride that I took while working in the Saarland. So if you guys have already passed it over, then you would know that essentially that while I was on a motorcycle ride visiting my parents on the way back, I stopped back into town. And while there, I smelled this horrible, horrible stench, and I ended up asking what the stench was, and the people there simply told me that it was the smell of burning flesh, that people were being cremated and burned in the concentration camps. In the concentration camp, there were Jews, and not only Jews, there were also communists. And there were some of these communists in our town who disappeared. There were some who disappeared who were sick. That was all managed by the party. The party happened to disappear. Epileptics and the like, those kinds of sick people, they were all gone. That was well known. Today nobody wants to admit having known about it, but they did know about it, that they were being sent to concentration camps. The Jews were also arrested in the exact same way they were going. I was in a town where one knew everybody. There were 2 Jewish families who were suddenly gone. Did they just flee? We had a Jew there. He was a bait picker by profession. He came from a neighboring town, and then he came to our town. He was then exposed, and then he was also arrested because he was a Jew. But where was he sent to? The people also knew about that. All right. Anyone want to take a guess as to the number of Gestapo officers that there were in that small town in which people began to disappear?
4.
Smaller.
3.
Smaller. No.
Yeah.
What did anyone say?
Just
1.
can't.
Huh? 1. Smaller.
None? There were none?
Half.
I don't know if it was the first person who said none, so I'll just go by the honor system.
We have no idea.
I think you might have said first.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'm a horrible question. Okay, whoever wants this can have it. Yes, there were 0 Gestapo officers in our town. Everything was done and known by normal people, average police officers, and small-time members of the Nazi Party. Soldiers stationed in our town and soldiers returning to our town from the front lines or from wherever they had been working talked about the concentration camps. They talked about the gassings, and they talked about soap made from human bones. It wasn't a dangerous subject to talk about. There were no Gestapo officers. Everyone knew about it. It was open knowledge. There was an only son in our town. He was a proud young man who had been called up into the SS, and he was in a concentration camp. The young man simply didn't go along with it, and he was shot despite being an SS man. And that was also known to us in our town. So, and that is the story of Ernest Walters, the story of how I, someone who didn't even become a Nazi until 1935 when my country joined with Adolf Hitler, already knew about what was happening in the camps, and how the people in our town, despite there not being any Gestapo officers, knew about what was happening and were convinced.
Yeah, that's up by the
If anyone wants this, you can just have it.
monitor there.
Yeah.
I'll take it, 'cause I love them.
Okay.